Welcome to the Contagious Code podcast, where we dive deep into code, learn practical skills, celebrate the beauty of engineering, and eliminate imposter syndrome. I'm Tejas Kumar, and I've been building on the web for over 20 years at places like Vercel, Spotify, Zeta, and more. Today, my guest is Rizèl Scarlett, a staff developer advocate at TBD, that is, to be decentralized, and formerly a developer advocate at GitHub on the Copilot project. In our discussion, Rizèl talks about DevRel and how she embraces skeptics and fixes skepticism through education. And in this episode, she does that with me. I come to the episode as a skeptic on Web 5, specifically asking, Web 5, what is that? Why did we skip one after Web 3 and go to Web 5? And Rizèl answers lovingly, patiently, and kindly to explain that Web 5 is the best parts of Web 3 and the best parts of Web 2, so 2 plus 3 is 5. Specifically, Web3 is nothing more than an SDK built on top of open web standards from the W3C around verifiable identity. The whole point of TBD is to encourage and support decentralized verifiable identity across the web. If we think about identity on the web today, our identities usually belong to a single company with accounts on them. For example, you've got your Facebook account, your Facebook ID, your Twitter, currently X ID, your Google ID. You've got these IDs that belong to single companies, but there isn't a decentralized ID that you own that you can verify with these platforms, therefore owning your identity and data across the web. Web 5, the SDK, enables this through the use of open web technologies, and in our discussion, we go through how. We also talk about the other SDK from TBD, that is TBdex, that encourages and allows for secure financial trade across the internet. Now, this discussion is in-depth, it's novel topics for me, and Rizèl really showcases her DevRel experience by educating me in a very, very helpful and welcoming way. So hat tip to Rizèl, thank you for doing this, and I hope you enjoy the discussion. Now, I'd like to offer this to all of you at zero cost, because this is very separate to my day job, and the way we can do that is through sponsors and partners. So let's take a moment to acknowledge them, and then we'll dive into the discussion. The Contagious Code podcast is partnered with Stately.ai. Stately is a great way to visualize how logic flows through your application using state charts and state machines. Once you design a state chart, you can export it to JSON and just fill in the transition logic from like state A to state B with your specific business logic, giving you a deterministic flow of state through your application that you can then unit test and so on. They also have a framework for AI agents called Stately Agent that helps guardrail AI agentic workflows in your applications. If you'd like to give that a try, go to stately.ai. That conference is currently happening as well and is a partner of the podcast. That conference is a family of conferences that is multidisciplinary, that celebrates all of tech and is family first and happens in a water park. They have a number of great speakers and especially good keynotes. If you'd like to attend any that conference for free in the future, share this episode on social media, say you'd like to attend one, and you will enter a raffle to get a ticket. Finally, the Contagious Code podcast is partnered with Code Crafters. Code Crafters has a way of teaching very similar to me. They teach you how tools we use every day, tools like Git, Docker, and Redis, are built by having you build them from scratch in a language that you know, like Python, Java, or JavaScript. And by doing this, you get better at the language you choose, but also at the tool by building it literally from scratch, thereby understanding its underlying mechanism. They have a generous free tier. If you'd like to pay and get 40% off, you can go to tej.as/codecrafters. There are links also in the show notes. This has been a really great discussion with Rizèl. Thank you for sticking around. Now for my discussion with Rizèl Scarlett. Rizèl Scarlett, an absolute honor having you on the Contagious Code podcast. Hello.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm honored to be on.
I'm so glad you're here. I see that you've worked at GitHub and now you're at TBD, and you're doing a lot of fun things. My earliest memory of you is, I think, seeing you sort of making waves at GitHub, and then I spoke to Brian Douglas, B-Dougie at Open Source, just before I invested, and we were totally like fanboying over you. But that's my experience, and absolutely enjoy your work. But I'm curious, for those listening who maybe haven't had that experience, who haven't heard of you, would you be willing to do a little bit of an introduction to yourself and what you've been up to?
Yeah, totally. So, like you said, I worked at GitHub as a developer advocate. I really enjoyed exploring open source, and also I did a lot of work with GitHub Copilot. And I think what I realized about myself is I kind of enjoy, I don't know if this is a toxic trait, but I kind of enjoy when people are like, I don't know about that technology, like they're skeptical, and then I just like not even like I'm not even like trying to convince them or anything. I'm just like showing them what I've learned over time, and then they like leave and they're like, oh, you know what? I'll give it a try. And so I felt like I did that a lot with GitHub Copilot. Um, and helping people navigate open source as well. And now I'm a staff developer advocate at TBD. And I think there's lots of reasons why I was attracted to working at TBD, but I think part of it, I'm like, I kind of want to see like if I'm able to help like the skeptics of like Web5 and everything better understand. It's a way bigger challenge because I'm also having to just learn and understand how the technology works. What else should I tell people? If people don't know what TBD is, basically, Block is like the parent company and it owns multiple companies like Square, Cash App, Tidal, and then TBD is like an additional one within that. But I'll let you ask more questions and
Yeah.
expand.
Thanks for clarifying what TBD. A lot of people think it's to be defined, and you sort of work at like an undefined place. But as I know, it's to be decentralized, right? That's what the
Yeah.
TBD stands for.
Yeah, that's what I swear I seen that in the Slack. I can't find it anymore, but I'm like, I always tell people that because when I go to conferences and I have my badge, it says TBD, and people are like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You didn't put your company name. I'm like, no, that's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like the people in charge knew that would happen and chose to do it anyway. I love that. I would do that just to mess with people.
Fun.
Okay, I love that you said you're drawn to the skeptics and the people who go like, oh, that's not really technology. I feel like, look, with something like GitHub Copilot,
Yeah.
I don't know that there were many skeptics, at least from my like little bubble, right?
Mm.
I play in open source and I'm like, oh, this is cool. I have to do less work now. I just hit tab. So in with me and all my peers, and we're just like, wow, that's so cool. And it's so cool that AI is slowly eating the world. And I just, I have this new website that has AI as a first class. So like AI is cool. Wow. That's the bubble that I'm in. I'm
Yeah.
curious if you could speak to some of the skeptics who saw Copilot and they were like, oh my gosh.
No, yeah, I think I saw skeptics even when I was interviewing to become a developer advocate, like at GitHub and then at a couple other companies. Sometimes they'd be like, "Oh, what technology are you interested in?" And I'd be like, "GitHub Copilot," and then people would give me like a whole lecture, and like, I'd be like, "Okay," and like I guess like a lot of people felt like they just didn't understand how it was working. So they're like, it's stealing my code. Like it's like
Mm,
super unethical. There was like tweets. I don't know. Like even my team at one point we were kind of like, let's let's not stay away from it. Like we still need to talk about it, but be careful in how you talk about it and don't like focus on it too much because like my boss is like, I don't want to see y'all's names like on like TechCrunch or anything like for getting in trouble of saying the wrong thing. Um, so there was a lot of people like that. I remember like a professor had like posted that he felt that GitHub Copilot stole some code that he wrote in a textbook. People thought that some people didn't really understand how it worked. They were like, it's not coding for me, like it's just creating nonsense. So I
mm.
think it wasn't like as much skeptics as like Web5 has, but there was some like skepticalness. And some people like I've done talks and like people have like come up to me and been like, "Oh, I like unsubscribed or like deleted my like GitHub Copilot subscription, but after you did your talk, I kind of want to try it out again because maybe I wasn't using it right."
Interesting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like a lot of the skepticism in the case of Copilot, and we'll get to Web five. I may be a skeptic myself, but and I can't wait to see you do your thing.
Yeah.
But with Copilot, it sounds like a lot of the skepticism just comes from like not knowing how it works. So where there's unknown, there's fear.
Yeah.
Um, what was the straw that broke the camel's back per se? Like what made the people go like, oh, I want to give it another try?
Interesting. That's a good question. Okay. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe my talk leveled up with
Yeah.
Copilot, maybe. I think because I kind of just showed how other people were like I educated people on how they were like people were using it. I'm like, yo, you can use it for patterns, like or if you have patterns within your code, you can use it to for APIs, unit testing. And I think just seeing like real life examples made it a little bit better. I think maybe at the time GitHub Copilot was more like the way that GitHub was talking about GitHub Copilot was more from like the marketing side, like the marketing team.
Mm,
But they may not always understand like fully how like a developer will want to see it. So they're like, what is this? I can just code by myself or whatever. But I think
yeah.
doing that talk and a couple of blog posts about like how to optimally use it and where the benefits are, I think that helped.
That sounds like a really strong case for good DevRel, right?
Yeah.
Because marketing in this case and DevRel were so distinct that your DevRel work helped people actually adopt Copilot and make it what it is today, frankly. So
Yeah.
I think that's really cool. Interesting. So what I'm hearing is people are skeptical and they're afraid.
Yeah.
And by the way, I do this a lot. I apologize if this is foreign, but I'm trying to like extrapolate a pattern.
Yeah.
What's a pattern that we can reproduce with other things that people are skeptical of? And hopefully, as we talk about Copilot and open source and Web5, we identify like, okay, this is the secret sauce, so to speak, to use B. Dougie's words. This is the pattern by which you like diffuse like fear and uncertainty and doubt and things. Okay, so with Copilot, you mentioned people were afraid because they thought, okay, this thing is stealing my code and it's bad. And then through some really great DevRel work, you said, no, but look, you can use it for this, this, and this. You highlighted the use cases.
Yeah.
And you showed it's actually just a Copilot. It's not a replacement.
Exactly.
And that diffused some fear.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'm wondering now if there's a case for showing the use case or what you can do with things as a way of saying, this isn't scary. This is useful. And that may be what, broke the camel's back. Okay, so you mentioned you're drawn to skeptics and you mentioned GitHub Copilot and you mentioned also helping people with open source in GitHub.
Yeah.
This is another bubble that I'm in. To me, all I see is open source is great. That moves the web forward. Everybody should do open source. And if you're not an open source, then get into open source because there's money among other things. What do skeptics of open source say?
Yeah. I mean, I think I was a skeptic.
What?
Okay, I did not. This is well, I mean, it's not like a crazy confession. I did not contribute to open source like before GitHub. Yeah. But that's just because I didn't really know. Like my journey into open to coding itself was just like as means of like I guess finances. So whenever someone would describe it to me, I'm like, so I will code for free, and I'll be like, I already get paid to code.
Yeah.
So I think that's where sometimes people, I don't know if they're called skeptics, but they just may not understand. And there are a couple of people like that. And when I joined GitHub, I made my first open source contribution and I like wrote a talk and a blog post called Overcoming the Fear of Contributing to Open Source. So I think it was really just me not understanding the point of it, but yeah.
So the fear is in exploitation, really, isn't like, wait, I'm going to do all this work for free.
Yeah, and then I think now that you say that too, another thing I was nervous of is like random internet strangers just critiquing my code. I was like, I don't know.
Yeah. And because they don't see a face, they don't see emotion, it can be pretty impersonal and pretty harsh,
Yeah.
right? It's like we're really empowered on the internet to be our worst selves because it's just text on the other side. It's not a human being.
Exactly.
Wow. I'm so thankful already we're just a few minutes in, but like I'm learning about stuff outside my bubble. Because in my developer bubble, open source is like, oh, look at this person. They have a lot of open source projects and so on. But indeed, like if I think back to earlier in my career before I got into open source, my first few open source contributions were also really not well taken, put it that way. There was a lot of what are you, a junior developer type of attitude. To early pull requests I opened, and I was that.
Yeah.
Yes, but it made me feel bad,
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I did not want that. I was like, I want to be completely protected from anything like that. So I'm just going to stay within my company's code base. But I was wrong.
What's the secret sauce to unlock people being skeptical of open source? What will help people get in the door? And I don't mean just like to coerce people because this is the way, but there is a ton of value in open source, as I'm sure you've discovered, right?
Yeah.
Like you do work, you move the web forward, you move ecosystems forward, but you also build a sort of portfolio for yourself and a reputation.
Yeah.
So there are positives. What was the thing that helped convert some skeptics with open source, including you?
That's a good question. I mean, I think B. Dougie really helped. If we're talking about secret sauce, he had a open source, which I think it has a lot of repositories that are like beginner friendly. You know what I mean? It's
That's
not
awesome.
nothing scary where you're like, oh my God, like, will I mess up or whatever. So I like created like a drop down component or something. And I was like, cool, I did it. So I think it's just having like a low barrier to entry with the setup, with the like understanding the issues and like just the whole process overall.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's yeah, that's super useful. And I must say, open source, I love them. I use it a lot. I loved it enough to do a small angel check, and I really hope it succeeds because it's a really excellent little product. Okay, cool. So we've talked about what was we talked about Copilot, we talked about GitHub and open source. Let's shift to where I'm a skeptic. This is so cool because we started with everyone else is a skeptic of GitHub Copilot.
Yeah.
You were a skeptic of open source.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about where I'm a skeptic.
Yeah.
Rizel, I'm super skeptical about all this Web5, Web3. What happened to Web4? And I realize I sound like old men shaking fist at cloud. And I don't want to.
Yeah.
But okay, so maybe we can do this. I'll tell you. I'll be wrong on camera as I usually am. And then maybe you can help fill in some gaps. How about that?
Yeah.
So let's start with blockchain. I mean, the company is called Block, for goodness sake. So blockchain, as far as I know, is basically a structure similar to Git, where you have a chain of blocks. Each block is cryptographically signed, and the hash of the previous block is used in computing the next block. So integrity across blocks is maintained. And in Web3, gosh, I'm really showing my ignorance here.
No.
I feel so fragile, so vulnerable, put it that way. And then so you have this blockchain, and that's shared in a decentralized way across everybody. So I think Git is a good analogy, and maybe you'll tell me if I'm wrong, but I Git clone a repo, and I've got like a local blockchain, and it's decentralized. It's on everyone's computer. How am I doing so far?
Okay, so I'm also going to admit something crazy to you. The amount of blockchain and Web3 knowledge you have, I also have. My company doesn't do anything with blockchain.
But it's called the block.
I mean, Block does stuff, I guess, but TBD does it. TBD is not based on blockchain at all. I could back up and explain stuff to you, because
Please.
I literally like I have like what I understand about blockchain is what you just said, and like my knowledge stops there.
Wow. I'm so happy. I'm so happy because
You're embarrassed. I'm like,
I'm happy because I get to learn something entirely different. This is so cool. Okay, so let's let's back up.
yeah.
And what on earth is TBD? What is Web5? How does it relate to blockchain? Does it relate to block? I don't know. I'll let you speak.
Okay, so there is a lot of projects within TBD, but I'm gonna see if I can describe it in a way that would make sense. Oh, yeah, all right. So basically, we have two SDKs, one called TBdex and one called Web5. I'm gonna start with TBdex because I feel like once I finally understood the whole point of TBdex, everything else connected, right? So TBdex is like at its core, it's just a messaging service, but the whole point of it is to be able to enable the global exchange of money, because Block is really proud that like within the US, we have like Cash App and Square. So like Square enabled like having a card reader, and like a mom and pop shop or whatever can be able to like accept payments just from their phone, right? So we're like, oh cool, we like enabled this part. And then we have Cash App where it's like we enabled people within the US to send money pretty quickly to each other. They just got to be like, tap, here it is. But we also realized that like globally it's much harder. Like you're in Europe, and my family lives in Guyana and Antigua, and for me to send them money, I got to go to Western Union. It takes a little bit longer. It's not just a click of a button. There's transaction fees. They have to go to Western Union and pick it up. It's annoying, right? So they're like, what if we like made it much easier to exchange currency or like exchange goods or whatever? And then in order for this to also happen, there's other problems, right? Like you need to be able to verify that person's identity, that they're like a person you trust to send money to or to receive money from or whatever the good is. And there's There's just a whole bunch of other things that they have to think about. So to enable that, they created Web5. They basically looked at some W3C standards like decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. Basically those are like things that people are using to help with like identity in tech, and they're like, why don't we like make this into a programming framework, and then we can use that programming framework to like enable TBdex. I don't know if that made sense, but like you can ask me more questions.
Yeah, that made sense. I'm gonna say back to you what I heard, and then you can correct me.
Okay.
So TBdex is like Wise. It's a way to send money across the world, across continents.
Yeah.
Both Wise and TBdex have to solve for some very interesting problems. Problems like identity verification, getting money to the other side reliably, but also reasonably fast, and handling any fees along the way in terms of like currency exchange. What I'm not seeing is why TBdex or how TBdex is different from work that Wise does, because at the end of the day it's just money, and this is just because I'm not experienced with like money transfer. And then maybe we can get into questions around the W3C and Web5 and the identifiers and stuff, but could we maybe draw like a distinction between traditional money exchange and TBdex?
I don't know too much about Wise. And okay, one other thing is TBdex itself is not like, Wise sounds like it's an app, right? TBdex itself is not an app. It's an SDK for developers to be able to build with that. I think more of the difference. Okay, so and also to give a disclaimer, there is like multiple developer advocates on my team, and I focus less on TBdex. I focus more on Web5, so there might be holes in my understanding as well. But with TBdex, you basically more have you kind of do like more like a request for a quote, and then quotes come back to you of like, okay, you can change I don't know, like Naira to US dollars for like somebody says like, oh, for 0.01% like I don't know, cents or something, like I don't know. And then another financial institution's like, oh, you can do it for 10 cents or whatever, and you're like, oh, obviously I'll take this one, or maybe this one is more trusted and it's cheaper, I'll do that one and be able to exchange the money that way. I don't know how Wise works, so I don't know if I could make the distinction, but I know with like, for me, like using Western Union, it's gonna take much longer. It's not like as immediate. And I do think I've tried to exchange money through Bank of America / Wise to a friend in Nigeria, and it kept getting rejected. So I think our whole goal is like, how do we just streamline the process where it's not like constantly getting rejected, where you're not like, oh, it didn't work this time, and there's a lot of high transaction fees. So we're just trying to make sure that like the power is in the person who wants to receive the money, they're paying lower costs and they're receiving it faster.
That's awesome. And it's probably, I wonder if there's a financial institution on the other side of it, or if it's app to app, I guess, because with Wise and most other, and like Western Union, what you're doing is you're sending money to Western Union and then they send it to a target bank. But it sounds like if the mission is to be decentralized, that's to people have the power over their own transactions, right?
Yeah.
In theory. And so maybe the target is, I realize I'm answering my own question here. Maybe the target is not a financial institution, but it's another person's account on their app. That's just a software account that they can then have a card that withdraws money from that, not necessarily affiliated with the bank, but just with the whatever application people build with this SDK. Does that resonate?
Yeah, I think so. I think we have the option for a PFI, which is like a financial institution, to do that to their wallet, and then the option to like it to be like person to person. And we're coming out with 1.0 pretty soon. So I'll be able to have more information on like how it actually works in
That's awesome. I would love to use that. I mean, so right now my website has quite a bit of AI features going on, and it's expensive. It's pretty expensive. And And so to offset the cost, I've decided I'm just going to keep it free forever. It is pretty costly to run like GPT-4 in production.
Yeah.
And there's a search. Actually, people can come search now when this is published on my website for something like, what is TBdex, and they'll get
Oh,
pointed to this point in time where you explain that. So it's really cool, but it's expensive, and I offer a way for people to support that by just sending me cash on like something like Venmo. It's coffee, but this may be a case to build something with TBdex. Okay, so TBdex is this exchange that allows people to exchange money,
yeah.
and then Web5 came out as a way to support TBdex through helping with identity verification. Is that accurate?
Yeah, at least that's how I think of it. Like, this might not be the way that the company explains it, but I'm like, not like it made sense where I'm like, oh, it's like an interconnected part. So let me see if I can explain Web5. There's multiple things within it. So Web5 has.
Can we? Sorry to interrupt you. Can I start with? Maybe we can go really back to like the beginning of this, or the highest level, so to speak,
Okay.
and just break down the W3C for people listening. Because again, there may be people listening who don't even know what that is,
Oh,
right?
that's
What is the
true.
W3C? Where does it come from? And then we can maybe come all the way down from the W3C to the what's it called? I believe the verifiable identifiers or something like
Verifiable
that.
credential.
And then
Yeah.
that one,
Yeah.
yeah.
So W3C stands for Worldwide Web Consortium, and it's like group of people or groups of people who like set standards for the web. So they set standards for like CSS and how we're going to be using it, or like accessibility. So they also have different identity standards. I believe some people that work at my company now also help to set some of those identity standards. So some of the identity standards that they have and we use is like decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials. I also want to make a side note that we're not the only ones using this. Like Auth0 does, Microsoft does, Workday. Like there's a lot of companies that are leveraging these technologies, but I think they're just like a little bit more quiet about it. So like they're being more experimental about it. I think, yeah. And to describe what some of these like standards are,
Yeah.
right? So decentralized identifiers is like your unique ID for you to like move across the web. So it will usually start with DID and it'll have like a method. There's like a whole bunch of methods. I don't really remember why all of them exist. Like I think just companies are like, oh, I'm gonna make our own did method and it does this certain thing. But each did has a cryptographic signature, like you were saying earlier about blockchain, where it's like there's this public key and there's this private key. And basically, the public key is like proof to everyone else, like, yeah, this belongs to Tejas. This decentralized identifier belongs to Rizel. And then the private key is like not to be shared, like that's your special thing. If it's compromised, then someone can steal it from you. But the whole idea is that you could sign in to a web app as like DID da 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 da, but it will have an alias over it. Let me see if I can even add more information. Have you ever used Blue Sky, the social media app? Yeah,
Yes.
under the hood of your username and that DNS setup they have, you have a decentralized identifier. So I guess if they plan to like expand the product more, I think they're using it more in like a trial mode or whatever. But like if they expand the product more, you'd be able to move across the web with that decentralized identity. And the idea is that people store their identity in like some kind of like wallet, like your phone's wallet, or maybe your laptop has a wallet, and you just be like, oh, click, I'm logging in as me. Because I think what they're trying to do is they recognize that the internet doesn't have like, as Angie likes to say this, right? The internet doesn't have like this identity layer. And it's really fragmented. We have to remember all these different passwords and all this other stuff. So it's like, why not just have that same identity across the internet? And just be able to connect it all. That way, like Black Girl Bytes on GitHub would be connected with Black Girl Bytes on Twitter. I seen another similar thing. It's not necessarily a decentralized identifier, but what is it called? It's some open research ID or something like that. Like open source researchers have like their own digital identifier. And that way it can connect all their publications to them. No one's confused if their name is John Smith. It's like, which John Smith are you? Like, I know which one you are. You have this digital identifier. And now, recently, GitHub did an integration. So now they can connect their open source contributions with those publications. So that's decentralized identifiers. That was a lot. And then you have verifiable credentials. And those are like your documents in digital format, right? So like maybe your ID, your mobile driver's license, your degree, your anything that you're like, I have this in paper format. You can basically store it in your phone's wallet, just like you would with Apple Pay, and and present it to somebody. Often I give like the example. Oh, and let me just say one more thing too. There's a lot, so my brain's like moving.
No, it's good. It's good.
So basically, one of the benefits obviously is convenience, but another benefit is you don't have to disclose all this unnecessary information about yourself. And I often give this example of like, if you wanted to show that you were of legal age to drink, oftentimes you will give your ID. Now the bartender, the liquor store, or whatever, now they know your address, your full name, like every single thing. That's not really, they don't really need to know that. They only need to know you're over 21 or whatever the legal drinking age is in that country. So basically there's this thing called selective disclosure within verifiable credentials, where you can just say, hey, I have this proof from the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever government agency in my phone that I'm over 21. I'm allowed to drink. You don't need to know my name or anything. Tap the phone or whatever, the QR code, whatever, and then you'll see that proof and I get to move on. And actually, my last thing is mobile driver's license. Actually, like in the US, we have mobile driver's license, or some states do. They use verifiable credentials. And I know that you live in Europe, they're coming out eventually with a European digital identity wallet. They said 2024, but then I heard someone say 2026. Those are going to be using verifiable credentials to store all your documents. So you're going to be using them regardless if you're a skeptic or not, I guess. That's it.
That's so cool. That I love that. I love that it's an open standard, and I love that it's coming. You know, frankly, I'm here for it because this is my ID. I don't know if I should show it on camera here. Let me obfuscate some stuff, but this is my ID. And they have on it, for those listening, I'm sorry you're missing out, but my ID has here. It has a little blue symbol on it.
Yes.
There we go. This little blue symbol. That blue symbol is readable by some app over NFC, and it just has everything contained within my ID. I don't know that that's using verifiable credentials. I don't know if I have the digital ID yet, but I'm here for whatever you're talking about, because this thing doesn't work. And it kind of sucks that I have to use my physical card to log in on the internet. I wish there was some way I could like synchronize this card with Touch ID on my Mac, and then, like you said, you know, the digital ID would just persist. Wow. I have some questions about this digital ID. I think it's really cool, by the way. I need to read up on the spec, on the W3C spec. I'm assuming it's like, it's not a work in progress or anything. It's like published. It's in the living standard. Does this stand to maybe replace something like single sign-on, where you can like log in with GitHub and log in with Facebook and log in with whatever, and it's a standardized authentication protocol, so OAuth 2, OAuth 2.1, that aims to sort of solve the same problem, you know, like, because now we have these login experiences that are standardized enough where we can like log in with various platforms and various things, but also it's a bunch of passwords to remember that may be different to different things. So could you maybe speak to the tension or lack of tension between using something like digital identifiers across the web versus single sign-on?
Yeah, I do. I think we're moving within that like area, because like, you know, we had like just remembering your password, then we had single sign-on, now passkeys are coming out. I think that's like they're trying to get to that place where it's more seamless, and I think that's the next like evolution, but it is a little bit I think a lot of this is a little bit ahead of its time for consumers and technologists, but I do think I see that as like the next path forward. Because like you said, you're not going to need to remember your password. You're just like, oh,
Yeah.
this is me.
So Web5 is using these W3C standards to give you decentralized digital identity and verifiable credentials. And so what I'm hearing is developers can literally like npm install Web5 and start building with these things today. Is that
That
true?
is correct. That's correct. You do npm I and Web5, whatever credentials Web5 did, and then to like create a did, you would just do like did.dht.create, you have a did. Or sorry, decentralized identifier, that's what did's short for. Yeah, so it's pretty I think the SDK is kind of breaks it down more simply because a lot of it sounds like really, at least when I heard about it, it was like really heavily techy. I was like, oh gosh, sounds like a lot, but it's not too much lines of code. Yeah.
Okay. And do browsers, I'm so curious about this because browsers have built-in support for passkeys, meaning they'll bring up a little dialogue for you to like touch your touch sensor or authenticate with face or some biometric thing. Do browsers support this in that way yet, like natively with all kinds of elements, or is it all up to the developer to implement front end and back end logic to facilitate DID?
Yeah, I don't think it's supported yet. Oh, so we're currently working on, other companies already have like their wallet, like Auth0. If after this stream you want to like check out, like they have like a prototype wallet for that, but we're currently working on a wallet too, so people can see how it would work. But you would like store your decentralized identifier inside of your wallet. Maybe you have multiple identities. Maybe you have like, this is because I mean I have two Twitters. Like I have one for like my social, like my friend life, and then one for like my career. So maybe you're like, this is career me, and then you have like your friend you, right? So maybe you're storing two decentralized identifiers in there, and you just log in through that. Maybe it's a QR code scan. It is up to the developer for the implementation at this point. Yeah.
That's I don't know how to feel about this 2ID thing. Not judging you for having like two identifiers, but like on the internet that's fine to have like two handles on X, formerly Twitter, but yeah, no, I think
in real life that wouldn't work. No.
Yeah. Exactly. And if we want digital identifiers to sort of mimic real life, because like here's the thing that trips me up. Everywhere I go in the physical world, I take myself, you know? I'm just me. I'm my skin color, I'm my hairstyle, I'm whatever I am at that moment. I take that and I go to work and I go to school and I go to the movies, and I don't have the privilege. I could, I guess, put on a disguise, either physically or in terms of personality. But that's what it feels like to me, right? It feels like if you're using multiple digital identities in this case, it's sort of like just wearing a different outfit or a different mask even.
I guess I do that. I mean, and I think it's not like it's a requirement. If you only wanted one digital identifier, you have one digital identifier. And your physical IDs, you couldn't have multiple of like the verifiable credentials, you couldn't have multiple of those because the government only gave you, they said, yeah, this is Tejas. Basically, I don't know if I described the physical ID to verifiable credentials part really in detail. Maybe I could add some more. So I already talked about decentralized identifiers and you moving across the web, but with a verifiable credential, you would have like three people in the whole exchange, or like three roles that you can think about. The person who's issuing it to you, or the agency or whatever, right? So maybe that's the government, maybe that's your college, and they're like, yeah, this is Tejas. Tejas did finish his degree at this school, and then they sign it with their decentralized identifier, like as proof.
Okay.
So you couldn't have like multiple, like this is multiple IDs of me. Yeah. And so they sign it, and then you have it in your phone and you give it to an organization and you're like, here, this is me. And the organization's like, well, obviously we trust the University of San Diego or something like that. So we accept it and we agree. Yeah. So that's how it would more be if it's like physical. But for me, I have, I guess, more than one digital identity. So
Yeah, no, and I need to be clear. I think that's there. I don't judge that because I do. There's something to be said for being context
Yeah.
appropriate, right? For example, I've been told I'm a different person in like the gym locker room than I am
Yeah.
on Twitter, and I think people are thankful for that, you know. So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
totally get it. Awesome. I have a really silly
Okay.
question. Really
Okay.
silly question. Why Web 5? Is that I feel like we skipped one.
Okay. So I'm gonna say the company's thought, or like what I hear Angie say, and then my own, I guess, because I want to be authentic to me. I know what Angie always says is like the company likes to have playful names since a lot of the technology is like very heavy. So like they're like TBD, Web 5. And it's not really the next evolution. Like I think Web 3 is like we're the next evolution of the web. We're not really thinking in that way. We're just like, yo, we like this parts of Web 3. We like these parts of Web 2. We want to take them and put them together. Yeah. So
Hmm.
that's how they're thinking of it. My authentic impression is maybe it's a misnomer, right? I don't think it really it really reflects how cool the technology is, because I do think that immediately when people hear it, they're like, "Oh my god, I've been burned by cryptocurrency or Web 3 or whatever."
That's me.
And we have nothing to do with. There's no cryptocurrency. Like we're not coming out with a coin or anything. So I think once people learn about what it is, they'll be like, "Oh, that's cool," but it's not necessarily the next evolution of the web. They're just being funny.
My skepticism is starting to break a little bit because it has nothing to do with Web 3. I mean, there was this whole thing with like the metaverse and people and NFTs and people buying like actual real estate, but in software in a dreamland for millions
Yeah.
of dollars. And I was like, that was a timeline I didn't want to live in. And you know, maybe we'll get a Web 3 expert who'll come and like even break my skepticism there. But like, gosh, that I can't imagine spending a few million on some really just a 3D graphic when there's so much to give to people who need it like
Yeah.
physically. And that's part of my problem, and that's why I was burned
Yeah.
by Web 3. Okay, but so what I understand with Web 5 is it's literally we like this stuff from Web 3, the
Yeah.
decentralized stuff. We like this stuff from Web 2, the social aspect where you know have social networks and you have interactive websites. So 2 plus 3 5, and the web side of it is because it's built on web standards like digital identifiers, decentralized web nodes, and verifiable credentials. Is that
Yeah, I think
accurate?
that sounds like a good like analysis.
This is so great. I love, you know, a lot of people say, "Hey Tejas, why do you do this podcast? It seems like so much effort." But like I learned this is like a college level education from the great Rizèl Scarlett. I'm so
Thanks.
thankful. Okay, so we've talked about the primitives that the Web 5 SDK. I can't believe I'm having a conversation where I sound so confident about this stuff. It's blowing my mind. Okay, so we went over the components of the Web 5 SDK, which I didn't even know it was an SDK. Honestly, I thought it was like a methodology. Which are DIDs, which are VCs or
Yeah.
verifiable credentials, not venture capital, and the decentralized web nodes. So these interplay together to make Web 5 experiences and applications. Web 5 just being like a smart way to do identity, decentralized
Yeah.
identity on the web, using open standards. Okay, so you built, I saw a tutorial, a chat application with React using all of this. Um, can we talk about that a little bit? What what were some things you learned? What were some things you wanted to show and communicate through that? And how was it received by the
Oh yeah, I
community?
could definitely talk about that. So when I joined, I was still confused. Like I built like for the interview they tell you to like use decentralized web nodes with Web 5, store Spotify like songs in there and like have a playlist. And like I was still sitting there like I don't get how other people like I was like, so it's only stored in my local DWN. How is anyone else gonna see this? Like I was just so confused. Um,
That's a question I have right now.
well,
So
the chat app helped me to understand. So I actually saw a community member from like months ago made this thing called Dinger. And basically they were putting messages and they were sending it to a particular decentralized identifier. So it would get stored in their local DWN and the recipient's local DWN. And I was like, okay, this is cool. It kind of showed me that you can store, like, you can be able to send messages back and forth, because I'm like, that's the whole point of the internet, for other people to see it. But I rebuilt it because I wanted to, it was just built in like plain vanilla JavaScript. I'm like, people are like, they're using Next, they're using React now and stuff like that. So let me build it in something like that. And I was like, let me make it cuter, and maybe like actually building it out with a tutorial will help me to understand and the rest of the community. So that gave me insight into, I think I mentioned protocols a little bit, where I was like, okay, how did I have it? Basically, you could send, I think basically the protocol said, like, hey, I can read, like, the author of the message can read the whatever messages they created. They can write anyone could write messages. So that this is how it goes. It's like you have like who, and it would be like the author, recipient, or sender, or no, not recipient. Hold on, I'm trying to remember. It's anyone, author, and recipient, and then you can create your own custom roles, right? So I was like, anyone can write a message, but only the person who was the author can see the message or can read the message, and if it was sent to somebody, only they can see it too, so nobody else would be able to see it. It's like, I guess, a secret messaging app. So that kind of like brought some more clarity to myself of like, oh, okay, you can choose to just only you be able to see it, but you could also say, if I want to send it to a particular person with this particular decentralized identifier, they'd be able to read it, or maybe this person can only delete messages or whatever. Yeah, I don't know if that makes sense.
But it did make sense. I still don't understand fully how the and this is just me being dense. It's definitely not a you thing. How do you like store that in a way that people can read it, both the sender and the receiver? Where is it stored? Because as far as I know, decentralized web node is local to a device. That's what we said earlier with the wallet. And you mentioned protocols, but I'm not seeing like the dots connect.
Let me see if I can step back. Every person can connect to their decentralized web node through their decentralized identifier. So it'll be like, this is Tejas' database or decentralized web node, and he's like connecting to it with DID blah blah blah, and this is my decentralized web node. And then whoever built the web app, the protocols are just, and maybe it's a confusing name. Don't think of it like a HTTPS protocol or anything like that. The protocols are just the rules for how the data is structured and how the data can be exchanged. So if the chat app I built said, okay, if anybody uses my web app, anybody can create a message. But if you say, I want to send it to this decentralized identifier, then it'll find the decentralized web node for that identifier and store it there. Does that?
But how? How does it do that? Yeah.
Well, I don't know if I understand your question. Ask more. So hold on.
Yes. No, sure. So through the SDK, through the Web5 SDK, I'm assuming if I create the app, I have the ability as the author to say, okay, when somebody hits send, then take this message, this data structure, and find the decentralized web node belonging to the sender. And so I guess I find two decentralized web nodes, right? One for the sender, one for the receiver, and put the message in their databases, as you mentioned. My question here is, how does the application find... Yeah, exactly. Because like in a database, for example, in a centralized database, you talk to an HTTP endpoint, usually, if you're doing something serverless. Or you talk over Postgres protocol. You're like, this is my connection string to the database. Is the equivalent of that in Web5 the user's DID that then is able to query the decentralized web node of the user and place the data in there? I guess this is what. So I guess the question I'm asking. Yeah. Sorry. I guess the question I'm asking is the DID does that serve as the equivalent of like a Postgres connection string or an IP address?
Gotcha. I guess it's kind of like your password. And I remember that I left out a detail. You have a local DWN, but you also have a remote DWN. So for right now, that I just remembered
Ah,
that I left that out. I'm like, that's why it doesn't make sense. So right now, TBD is hosting like the servers of the remote DWN. The data is like encrypted and all that. So like we're not able to see what is in there, but it's like kind of like I guess cloud like for it to be able to be
mhm.
exchanged. And I think eventually, once we're out of technical preview, there'd be the option to, if you wanted to host your own DWN, or if there are companies that are trusted and they want to be able to host those DWNs
Great.
and make sure it's like encrypted and trusted and all that. That's how it would work. So that's what's happening. It goes to the remote DWN and it also like syncs to the local DWN as well. Yeah.
That's so cool. Thank you so much. I totally get it. And now I see how you can use Web5, the SDK, to build even something like
Mhm.
Blue Sky, right? Because there's probably DWNs where you can persist posts, and you can also have your own as the author's DWN, and you can have forks, and you could have your own DWN network once this is out of technical preview. This makes so much sense. Rizèl, thank you for like patiently helping me get this, because this is all super novel. This is so new compared to the things we know. Great. Okay, so let me again, just so I fully understand, describe this chat app. So you have a chat app, just like a text field, a submit button, and a list of messages. And user types a message. So you have in React, you're doing set state probably on the input field, and then on submit. There's a step that the Web 2 equivalent of this would be, I'm gonna do a fetch request to some web API that's a post that contains the chat information. To, from,
Mhm.
date, message. In Web 5, I'm going to look up the
Mhm.
DWNs that I need, and I'm going to send a message to those based on the author and the recipient. And then it's just going to be in their database and synced, or their decentralized web node. Is that accurate as a comparison between
I
Web
think
2 and
so.
Web 5?
Yeah, I think so. And we kind of have a similar
Ah,
like create, read, update type of thing. So you can be like, hey, oh, record dot, I think it's record dot read, record dot write, record dot update, record dot delete, and then to send it and to sync it across the remote DWN and the local DWNs, you would do dot send and then have that person's decentralized identifier in there. But yeah, that's right.
and of course, when people log into the app, that's how you get their decentralized identifier, right? They give you that in exchange for, now I get
Yeah,
to
I
use the
mean, you
app.
could even have, so we have this method called Web5 Connect where maybe because you're always on this particular browser, you have local storage, you don't really necessarily have to log in. Like at least in my chat app, it just gives you your decentralized identifier and you can start messaging. Yeah.
That's so cool. Awesome. I feel and this is so special because we haven't really looked at code. We haven't
You
opened an
froze for
editor.
me,
We've
so I
not
don't
done
know.
any screen share.
I think I missed a
But
lot that you
but
said. You froze for me.
oh, that's okay. The network. Yeah, I'll say it again. I think this is so cool because we have not done any screen share. We've not looked at any code. We've just been reasoning with the words, and maybe hand waving. But I totally get it. I feel, Rizèl, because of your great DevRel work, super empowered to build my own Web5 chat app, even though I've never done this ever before. So I think this is huge. I think this is a testament to really, really great DevRel work. Can we talk a little bit about the benefits and challenges of doing this? I'm a venturesome guesses. I think the benefits are, in some way, obvious, that it's more secure because you're not giving all of your data to some central authority. It's all decentralized. It's also convenient because you don't have to log in with some service you don't have, but you just get this DID. And in terms of challenges, to me, the biggest challenge, because behind the scenes, I think Blue Sky is evidence that you could do a whole bunch of stuff behind the scenes, but still give people a great experience that feels as
Yeah.
natural as Twitter, right? So in terms of challenges from a user experience, I don't think there are any. I'd love to be corrected. In terms of challenges for a developer, I would guess that the biggest challenge is trying to like reason around all this stuff that is so novel. Does that accurately capture sort of the benefit challenge landscape, or did
Yeah,
I miss something?
I'm trying to think. You brought up a lot of good ones. It is more secure. It allows you to have control of how of your own privacy. Let me see what else. I think some challenges, and oh yeah, like you said, the paradigm shift for developers, it's even hard for me to wrap my head around sometimes. That's why I'm like, I like doing these podcasts, so people can ask me questions and I'll be like, yeah, how does that work? But I think other ones could be like adoption as well. I think um there's another issue out there where I think a lot of companies are all trying to implement a similar thing, if that makes sense, right? Like everybody's like, oh, I want to solve this. Oh, I want to use decentralized identifiers. And I think it would make more sense if the companies work together. But I think we're all like
Mm.
working so separately. And I think we're still trying to figure out interoperability because it's like, yeah, in theory, there's Angie often gives me this example of like, let's say you use an airline often and you have your specific preferences on like Delta, like you're like, I like the aisle seat and I like da da da, right? And they're like, the idea is that, oh, you can go on to United and be able um to also have those preferences already set for you. But I think the other thing is like just when will companies agree to that connection and interoperability, I guess. Not to like talk down about the product. I'm just interested to see how it happens. I know Angie wrote this really great article where she basically talks about like once maybe one company starts adopting it, it'll be an eventual domino effect where it's like, oh, this is the norm. I want to move over to this because other like this is what users want. So yeah. This is a great.
What are some? No, that's good. But what are some barriers to companies doing that? Is it just a matter of it's too unfamiliar? Is it a matter of there's a lot of costs in terms of training their people and paying for employee time that they think is spent elsewhere? Obviously, you don't work at any of these companies, so you maybe don't have the deepest insight into their processes. But I'm sure as a developer advocate,
Yeah.
you get feedback, right? And you hear maybe some of the
Yeah,
hesitations.
I think the companies that do know about us and have adopted us, it doesn't seem like there's that much barriers. I think more the barrier is this is a new technology and most people are not many
Yeah.
people I think are not necessarily looking into it. But I can give examples of cool companies I've seen that are like leveraging this. There's this company called Formfree and they have a product called Passport. And basically they're enabling like giving loans to people, I guess, in a way, like lending. And the whole idea is that like you use Web5, like DWNs and verifiable credentials, and you're like, hey, I want a loan and I have this particular credit score. But and I don't know if you have credit scores in Europe, but whatever. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we do. We do.
You're like,
Yeah.
this is my credit score. And you're like, but I don't want you to know that I live on this street or that I'm black or whatever, anything that would create unconscious bias. So you only put your credit score out there. And then banks or any loan agency or whatever says, oh, I can offer you this. And another one says, I can offer you that. You swipe through whichever one is the best. You say, all right, I want this loan, and then more of your information gets shared. Like that's your agreement to like now we can move forward in the process. So I think that was cool. I think it didn't. We've been able to like help them. It seems like sometimes they might have like issues on understanding like how to set up their protocols or something like that because it's like a switch, but it seems simple. I think maybe from what I'm seeing, like some companies just don't know it exists, and that's on my team to continue talking about it.
And that's also, I guess, now on my podcast to continue talking about it. I think this is going to be really cool if
Yeah.
more people catch on, and I'll tell you why. Because it would solve
Yeah.
friction on the web to me. I really don't like. I booked a flight today to come to Seattle, Washington, and booking tickets on the internet always is the thing that I wish
Yeah.
we fix. And part of it is I clicked buy, and then British Airways was like, okay, do you want to make an account with us? And I was like, I don't want to make an account with you. I want you to know my
Yeah.
decentralized ID and just give me my ticket. I'll give you money. This doesn't need to be a whole personal thing. And not just that. I think you've alluded to this multiple times. You even said it explicitly. I could choose
Yeah.
what I want to share at the right amount of time, at the right point in time. That is so cool. So yes, I'm for it. I think everybody needs to stop trying to create their own solution and collaborate. It would be cool if there was a living standard, similar to digital identifiers and verifiable credentials. If the way of building with them was also standardized.
Yeah,
I think that'd
I
be really
agree.
cool.
I agree. I'm hoping Web5 could be the standard and everyone just adopts it. Yeah.
Yeah. I wish you the best with the DevRel work there. I'm happy to support this because I do think it's a better future. You talk a lot about combining. I mean, AI is obviously trending these days. It's I'm on the selection committee for some conferences for speakers, and it's really sad how many talks are being proposed about AI, and they're all the same. They're all like, here's how you get started with LangChain, and it's difficult for conference reviewers at this point in time. Regardless, that's just a testament to how prevalent AI is. You talk about using AI technologies like large language models or LLMs like ChatGPT with Web5. What would that look like? How do you see that playing out?
I'm trying to remember when I talked about it. I know for some areas, right? We have, or maybe one of the reasons why I started using it with Web5 is I believe the director of engineering, which is Angie's boss or head of, I don't know what his title is, but he's Angie's boss basically, and he built.
Wait, so Angie's boss is not Jack Dorsey? What?
There's multiple levels. There's multiple levels, but Angie's a VP, so he's whatever. I mean, he's our boss too. Jack is, but there's other levels underneath. What was I saying? He built a like ChatGPT plugin to basically like look at our Web5 documentation and answer questions. So that's kind of how I first started using it, because I was like, I need to ramp up very quickly at this company, and I don't want to look. I'm okay with asking questions, but I don't want to look like I'm asking the same questions over and over again and too many questions. So yeah, I use that as a resource. And then I started, I guess, leveraging it because we kept coming out, or we continue to come out with the SDK in other languages like Kotlin and Swift. And I'm no JavaScript, so I was like, I don't know how these work. So I've kind of just like compared the documentation and been like, oh, okay, here's how this works. ChatGPT helped me out. So, and Copilot helped me out. So I'm using it in that capacity, but I don't know what exactly you were referring to.
I was referring to I believe it was Kin, which is
sorry, I like just talked so much about nothing. Okay, Kin is so cool. It's
okay.
Another company that like built their tooling on Web5, and they essentially created like this ChatGPT alternative. Like, I don't think they're calling it that, but it's very similar to ChatGPT. And basically the biggest difference is like they're storing the conversations within a decentralized web node. So they're like, we have no access to whatever conversations you're having, as opposed to ChatGPT would. Like, that's local to you. That's all that you can see. I guess they're using AI. They're using like a whole bunch of stuff that's like over my head, like graphs and all this stuff and nodes, to make sure the conversations like separated. They continue to keep context over time, whereas like, with ChatGPT, you create a new conversation and it forgets, or you could even be in the same conversation and ChatGPT forgets. So they like have this like memory aspect where there's like nodes, and it's like, oh, I know Rizèl, she has like 2 best friends. She likes to watch Love is Blind. And it's supposed to be more of like a personal friend. They're describing it as. Yeah.
Interesting. I still so it's like ChatGPT, but they store conversations in a decentralized web node, a DWN, Dawn. We call it a Dawn. Is that?
Yeah. Sure.
I'm a little bit skeptical, Rizal. And if my facts are correct, this is something you
Yeah.
enjoy, the skepticism. It's a decentralized web node. It exists locally, but you mentioned TBD hosts them
Yeah.
remotely and it's encrypted. Is that not just then centralized with TBD? How is it decentralized if y'all host it? How is it different from just a hosted database like Supabase or something? And I don't mean to be reductionary. I
Yeah.
realize this sounds potentially dishonoring. That's not my intention here. I just really want to understand how it can be. I guess it's decentralized because I have it and TBD has it, but for the one hosted, is that not
I
just
guess our
centralized?
intention is not we've only hosted it just for like purposes of use, yeah,
A proof
as
of
proof of
concept?
concept. Our intention is not to
Okay.
be the ones hosting it. We already have the option if people wanted to host it on their own, but we do realize like not everybody's gonna want to sit there and like set up their own decentralized web node. So
Right.
we're giving the opportunity for like if you want to try this out, this is how it works. Companies can have it, and I guess that's might be where the decentralized but central, like the web 2 and web 3 concept come into place, where it's like we don't hate that idea completely. We just want to make sure that people have control over where things are going and how it's being used and who sees it. Like I think we can't see it. It's just enabling the process of
Yeah.
like syncing and everything.
Yeah. And if the web nodes are a standard, which I understand they are, then as you mentioned, anybody can spin up a standardized web node. And in theory, there'll be, at least this is just me projecting, there'll be replication across them. And all the replication is also end-to-end encrypted, meaning it is truly
Yeah.
decentralized that way. Sort of like Mastodon runs on
Yeah,
similar
like
architecture,
federated like
I believe.
component aspect. Yeah, I think so. And
Yeah.
I do wanna just for listeners, it's not decentralized web nodes are not a W3C standard. That's the only one that's not. I think they're like a standard within the decentralized identity foundation, but they're not a W3C standard. Only decentralized identifiers and verifiable credentials are. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying, because I did think they were W3 standards at this point. I wonder if there should be work done to make them a W3C standard, since
Yeah.
it's got web in it. It's a web. I don't know. Maybe a discussion for another time. Awesome. Thank you for that. There's another AI case that I remember reading about on the TBD blog, Netonomy, which is that similar to all I know is it's an AI application built with Web5. I'm curious what that looks like. What's it used for? I tried to use it, true story, in preparing for this, and it looks to be some type of file upload thing. I'm assuming it's using decentralized web nodes behind the scenes. I'm
Yeah,
curious
it
if you
was
can
made
speak to
by
that.
a community member. And like that was like my first when I joined Web5. I was like, I mean not Web5, TBD. I was like, ooh, this person's like creating this. It looks cool. Basically, what's his name? Anthony DeMatos. Basically, the way that he set it up is yes, you upload files there, and you put it in a decentralized web node. And where the AI part comes in, I believe he's using like ChromaDB or something like that, is it can it
Vector
can
search.
go through your like he gave the example of like putting up his rental agreement on there, and like if he couldn't remember like what date it expired or whatever, he can just ask the AI and it'll be like, oh, here's this specific detail. So he's like keeping your documents local to you, or if you wanted to like specifically share it with a specific person. Yeah, thought it was cool.
I'm so happy about this. Part of the joy of hosting this podcast, Rizel, is I talk to different people about different things that are actually somewhat connected, and I get to see the dots connect and go like, whoa. So I'm about to tell
Okay.
you about something so cool. And I think this is really a great case for Web5 technology that isn't being like Web5 isn't even being used here, probably because the people don't know about its capabilities. Therefore, this episode exists. Hopefully they do. So previously on the podcast, we had this guest, Kyle Simpson, as you've listened to. I saw you posted, and he talked about Vela, his AI project, VELLA.ai. and he's trying to do it local first, where it gets all of your data and is a full assistant. So it gets your calendar, it gets your email, it gets everything, and is just like, it's proactive. So you're just sitting, chilling in your hammock, and if you have a hammock, and you get a notification like, hey, just so you know, you're meeting Penelope in 2 weeks, and you don't have a location in your meeting yet. Also, I noticed the last time you ate Mexican food was months ago. So maybe here's a reservation. Do you want to approve it or deny it? Right? Proactive, just out of nowhere, and it finds the right time to notify you because it knows your life. They're
Yeah.
doing it local first, but gosh, this sounds like a really great case for everything we talked about so far, from decentralized identity. So how does it know me? I can upload all of my verifiable credentials because it's secure into decentralized web nodes and use it for generative AI. Wild. Am I
No.
talking nonsense, or
I
is
mean,
there
there are
actually
dots
dots
connecting,
connecting
and it
here?
made me realize I kind of undersold Kin, because I mean, I guess because I don't work there, so I'm not like constantly thinking about it. But their intention is for Kin to work similarly. When they said it's like a personal friend, I believe they added in reminders, so you talk to it, you tell it stuff, and it's like, don't forget about taking your medicine. And I think I did a stream. I do streams with like people in the community or other like maybe Auth0 and all that to figure out like how are you all using decentralized identity. And I did a stream with the CTO of Kin, and he's like, what he's envisioning for the future is that like maybe your kin knows that like you like to get Starbucks every day at 9 a.m. This is your particular order. So you say, although I have
Yeah.
this data local to me, I'm willing to share it with Starbucks through their website or whatever. And on your behalf,
Hmm.
the AI agent or kin uses a verifiable credential to say, yeah, um I got like permission from Tejas to do this Starbucks order. This is what Tejas wants every morning at 9. So there's similarities there too. And I think you're on point. When I listened to Kyle's podcast, I was like, this is very similar. There's like synergy here.
That is so cool. We may see competitors between Kyle and Kin, but I'm here for it. I think competition will make something
Yeah.
truly awesome for humanity. And it'll also be a great test of
Yeah.
local first versus web 5, which I will be watching closely. My good friend Johannes Schickling has a podcast about local first, localfirst.fm, and it's cool. I love local first. But I feel like there's a lot of hype around. Anyway, discussion for another time. Awesome. Thank you for that. Look, I came into this thinking Web 5 was some blockchain thing, and now I get it. It's built on open web standards. It's a secure way to do identity and share files. Let's shift focus and use our last few minutes here to talk about some of the work you've been doing with organizations like G Code House, and others to help make tech more accessible to people. Because you did mention, talking about verifiable credentials and DIDs. You mentioned like this thing about I'm going to apply for a loan from a bank, and I'm just going to share my digital identifier and maybe my salary. But that's it. I don't need to share my name, my skin color, my zip code. And you spoke about reducing cognitive bias. I think that is so, not cognitive bias, but yes, unconscious bias. I think that's so cool. And I see the case here. And I know that you care about this because you've also talked about stuff like this quite publicly and often. So can we tie all of that together and speak to some of the work you've been doing
Yeah.
in that area as well?
G Code, you mentioned that. So I benefited from a nonprofit coding boot camp called Resilient Coders. I know like Paris, I don't know if you know Paris, she went there too. Um, oh, you
We used to work
did.
together, actually.
Oh, shoot. Yeah.
Um, yeah, at
Oh my God,
G2I.
I didn't realize
Huh.
you worked at G2I. Yeah. So like I benefited from that, and I really appreciated that as an experience, like introducing me to tech. And I also benefited from other programs like Hack Diversity and stuff like that. And I, as a Black woman, I see that is sometimes difficult. I've experienced really weird, awkward experiences as well. So I my involvement in like something like G Code, it was just out of me being like, I want to make sure people feel comfortable and prepared going into tech. I really liked leading it. Um, Basically how it started is like the founder, she came to me with this idea that she had. Her idea is she wanted women of color to be basically be able to live in this house she bought in Massachusetts. And like basically she wanted it to be like, yeah, maybe you're struggling with like homelessness or whatever. You live in this house, you learn to code, you graduate, and you have your job and everything. However, that had a lot more constraints to it because it's like you got to get permission from the neighborhood and all that. So while that was in process, I was like, what if we like did like a meetup or something? I don't know, and like that we could start teaching them now because a lot of people had so much pushback on us of like, okay, this is an idea, but how do we know it'll work? So I'm like, we can kind of like proof of concept it out. So we like started meeting in the library. I was teaching women of color how to code. Pandemic happened, and we shifted to being in a virtual environment. But I loved it, and like I think my passion from it just stems from like I'm a minority and I don't like some of the experiences I've had, so I want to make sure that other people have positive experiences, I guess. Yeah.
G Code House, for those who are listening who haven't heard of it, is it similar to a hacker house where it's just a big house where people can come and play and learn to code, develop
That's
their
what it's
skills,
supposed
and
to be.
find a job?
Nobody's living in the house yet. It's still virtual. But yeah.
What's it going to take for it to get there? Is it just a funding thing, or
So I don't know what's the limit right now because I no longer work there after I became a developer advocate. But I know like there's basically I remember we were like in the neighborhood, we had to get permission from neighbors. A lot of them were like a little nervous about the idea, like, oh, strangers are going to be living here. I don't know. And she specifically
I
chose
see?
like a place in like a more poorer area because she wanted to meet people where they're at. So there's just a lot of like limitations, and yeah.
Hmm. Thank you for sharing that. I really look up to the work you're doing to help people get into tech, and I can't imagine like teaching people how to code in a library. That's so cool and also interesting to me because you have to be quiet. And so how do you like?
That's funny. Okay, so like there's this big library in Boston called the Copley Library, and like they have rooms, like they had like computer media labs. So like I called them and
Ah,
I was like, "Can I use this room every Sunday?" And they're like, "Yeah, sure." So we didn't have to be quiet.
that's awesome. You know, I just want to say I empathize with you said I've had some experiences
Yeah.
because of being a minority that I didn't enjoy. Amen.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not. I'd say the degree of minority that you
Yeah.
are because I'm a man and I am brown, but like I at least um,
Yeah.
don't have gender working against me. If I can say it like that. And even despite that, like I've had experiences where if you talk about DEI,
Yeah.
so diversity, equity, and inclusion, I've been hired,
Yeah.
sometimes probably as a diversity hire, but I very quickly was not included. And this is actually the biggest sticking point for me in most jobs I've had, right? I'll be hired as like some really senior position,
Yeah.
director of DevRel, whatever it may be. But over time, the inclusion, I don't know if you've experienced this, the
Yeah.
inclusion just goes out of the window. Like in the beginning, it's like, oh yeah, full autonomy, like do your thing. We brought you in to have ideas. And I don't know what happens, but over 3, 6, 8, 9, 12 months, it becomes, so that thing you're working on, here's all these opinions that we think
Yeah.
you should do it differently. That's one thing. And I was
Right.
like, but you brought me in to do my thing. And then the second thing is, I think inclusion matters as much
Yeah.
as diversity, if not more, right? Because I've seen it happen that you bring in someone,
Yeah.
but you just don't include them. Like in terms of like speaking time, they don't get to speak that much. And in terms of decision, so I'm pretty salty about this. In terms of decision making, I've been in some very senior positions, but a lot of decisions just end up getting made without me between like other peers, and I'm just like, but
Yeah.
I don't feel included here. And sorry,
No.
I realize I'm speaking a lot, but you're striking chords with me here as well. And the one conversation I've kept having to have is
Yeah.
I'd like to be included more. And I feel like the fact that I even have to ask
Yeah.
that is somewhat of a failure of the industry at large. So anyway, tying all of that together, does that resonate? Is that similar? What can we do to maybe move
Yeah.
forward
It resonates with
better?
me. I mean, I was never hired in a super senior position. This is like my first this is my
Yet,
first senior position, and I luckily have that diversity and inclusion. My team, most of my team's like black. But when I was hired in junior positions, it resonates with me what you said, where I felt like they just hired me because they're like, oh, a black girl, we needed one. And then after that, they just dropped me. Like, I would be like asking for help. Like, I'm new to coding. I'm not trying to be like an annoying person. Like every time I'm turning around, like, hey, can you help me? But I see my coworkers team up with each other, and they're like, we can peer on this project. And I'm like, can you peer with me? And they're like, you asking for help again? I'm like, dang, okay. Or even when sometimes I'll be like, let me go ahead and be independent. I just felt like there was a lot of barriers in communication too, where I'm like, all right, I won't ask for help. I'm gonna do this on my own. And then they're like, why didn't you ask for help? Now you did this all wrong. And I'm like, this is a very frustrating experience. I and I think I end up having to switch to understand their methods of communication, but they don't switch to understand like the way I
Wow.
communicate. Like they'll jump to conclusions in the way I say things, so I have to like watch how I say it, but I have to like read between the lines of what they're saying so I can be like, okay, that's what you really mean, but I don't normally talk like this.
Your realness is sending me to a different plane of existence here. Yeah. I've had to do the same to the point where I recently, like as of this year,
Mhm.
learned an enormous lesson that I've been putting into practice at various workplaces, and it's served me so well.
I'll
And I
wait for
hope
you to
this
come
serves
back.
like whoever's listening, and I hope it serves you. To be fair, I don't think that you have this problem at TBD, which I'm super happy about.
I missed a lot of what you
But
said again. I feel like it was dope.
that's
Sorry.
okay. No, no, it wasn't. I was just setting it up. No worries, no worries. I'll say it again. I was saying I learned this huge lesson this year, and I hope it's helpful for others listening. I've learned that when things like inclusion go out the window, um, I'm prone to like dwell on it. I'm prone to go like, oh, they didn't include me, and now I feel bad about it. And I think that's a real
Yeah.
thing. Like sometimes it does hurt, but I think it's important to separate the hurt from like reading
Yeah.
intentions that were maybe never there, or thinking
Yeah.
about why they said it, what they said, like how, because like I found myself oftentimes spinning like really unnecessary stories about people's
Yeah.
intentions that sometimes wasn't even true. But instead of like, I'm not included and this hurts and that's okay, I'll deal with it, it was more, I'm not included, this hurts, someone has wronged me, why did they wrong me? And all of a sudden it
Yeah.
becomes all about this other party, when in reality I've learned that my biggest responsibility is to just
Yeah.
give my best, period. And my best is not like assuming what they mean or assuming their intention. My best is, hey, they
Yeah.
probably want to do their best, so how can I support them? So showing up to work in a way that is just like, I'm here to give my best, and people are going to wrong me. That's what we do. We're human beings. We often wrong each other. Even a room full of white men sometimes wrong each other. That's just what we do. Sometimes, and doing the work to be like, this is going to happen, it's fine,
Yeah.
and that has been super helpful for me. And I just wanted to, I'm a little bit, I don't want to say triggered, it's too strong, but it's a sensitive topic, and I feel like there may be people listening who could
Yeah. I
benefit from
agree.
hearing about that. um okay, final question. Maybe, no guarantees. I feel like there's a bunch of us who came in like me, skeptics, and now understand Web5, understand TBdex, understand decentralized web nodes, understand all these things. I am fixing to go build something with this stuff. I'm finna do it. I feel like Kanye. Anyway, I want to do it. What's the best way? Do I go check out the website? Do I read the docs first? Do I just
Mhm.
npm create TBD? Is that even a thing? How can I get started? And I guess in terms of what to build, I could just build a chat app probably. But I wonder if you could speak to those listening who want to go
Yeah.
build something right now after listening to this, or even
Yeah.
while
I
listening to
will
this. How can they
start.
do that?
So, like you said, our documentation site, developer.tbd.website. Um, and we have a quick start. That's like very simple. Like it's just like CRUD functionality to store stuff in a DWN. I would definitely look through like I think it's robust documentation. That, but I guess I'm tooting my team's own horn. But yeah, like we have like a learn section so you understand like how each of these components is working, and then we have a build section where you can check out like, oh, how do I maybe issue a verifiable credential or do like the whole workflow. We have a particular workflow that I think is interesting. It's called like fan club VC, where you kind of like issue verifiable credentials to the Taylor Swift fan club. And I think, yeah, you can really build anything. There's some interesting hackathon projects that people have built. Like somebody made ride fare, which is like a more safe Uber or Lyft rideshare type of situation. But yeah, I think a chat app or something that uses verifiable credentials where you want to prove that you're you. I don't know why, but my verifiable credentials are my favorite part of it. So I would suggest people go go to that. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, great. I feel motivated to build that into my own website. Somewhere I'll find a way. Awesome. Listen, Rizel, I know it's a huge investment to come on a podcast for multiple hours, but I walked in. This is, if anything, this is just absolute massive praise to you. I walked in really skeptical. I walked in thinking it had something to do with blockchain. I just didn't know my way around. And now, not only do I know it, I feel confident with it, and I could even teach it. You've made a volunteer developer advocate out of me with your amazing developer experience work. So on behalf of all of the listeners and myself, I want to thank you so much for coming on the Contagious Code podcast.
Thanks for
And I can't
having
wait
me.
to maybe
Thanks
do it
for
again
the
sometime.
really good questions.
Thank you for joining my discussion with Rizèl Scarlett. I hope you're as educated about Web5 and TBdex as I am, and also TBD. And I hope you're also stoked and excited for the future of decentralized verifiable identity across the web. And I hope also you take more seriously now your data, your ownership of that data, your ownership of your own digital identity, and are excited to move forward. If you're a developer, I hope you look into the W3C specs and you're excited to contribute, because a lot of this is open source as well. If you're learning from and or enjoying this content, a great way to support it at no cost is to share it on social media. If you're watching on YouTube, if you subscribe to the channel and like it, that will signal to the algorithm that this is useful content and support it for no cost, really. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, if you leave up to a 5-star review, that would also be a great way to support the podcast and signal your interest and desire for more. At this point, thank you so much for joining the discussion with Rizèl Scarlett. Thank you for being a part of this podcast, and most importantly, thank you for your interest in engineering.